In the 80s and 90s, cinema is often remembered as the age of action movies and science fiction, and that reputation is well-deserved because those genres truly thrived during that period. Films that nobody really believed in suddenly exploded at the box office, and new stars appeared so fast that it almost felt unreal. But if you look closer at that era, it becomes clear that action and sci-fi were not the only genres enjoying success. During the second half of the 80s and the early 90s, movie theaters around the world were flooded with family comedies, and surprisingly, those films often made more money than big action blockbusters. It was exactly in this environment that one of the most famous Christmas movies in cinema history was born. A project that almost no one believed in at the start. Many people involved later said they felt like they were working on a doomed movie, as if they were part of a creative suicide squad with very little chance of success. Everything changed the moment Home Alone reached theaters. The young actor at the center of the story instantly became the richest child star in Hollywood. Director Chris Columbus, who was not considered a major figure at the time, suddenly became one of the most in-demand filmmakers in the industry. The franchise began with record-breaking success and set the bar incredibly high for itself, which makes its later downfall even more striking. For Home Alone to become the movie audiences remember today, an incredible number of things had to align perfectly. One wrong turn at any stage, and the final film would have been completely different. Producer and writer John Hughes wrote the script specifically for Macaulay Culkin, whom he had previously worked with on Uncle Buck. During that film, Hughes was also the director, which allowed him to spend a lot of time with the actor. He was deeply impressed by Culkin's ability to be funny simply by existing on screen. Chris Columbus did not join the project right away. At first, John Hughes was looking for a director for Christmas Vacation, the third film about the Griswold family, and that was the project he originally offered to Columbus. Columbus accepted, but after meeting and talking with Chevy Chase, he quickly realized they would not work well together, and he walked away from the film. At that time, John Hughes was in an incredibly productive phase of his career. He was writing family comedy scripts one after another, and his projects almost always performed well at the box office. Columbus understood how valuable that opportunity was and did not want to lose the chance to collaborate with Hughes, so he asked what other projects were in development. That is when Hughes introduced him to the Home Alone script. On paper, it looked far less promising than a big studio comedy with Chevy Chase, but after reading it, Columbus agreed to take the job. Hughes had his own reasons for wanting to work with Columbus. Columbus already had writing credits on hits like Gremlins and The Goonies, and he had proven himself as a director with Adventures in Babysitting. Hughes believed Columbus had a natural talent for family-oriented stories and strong comedic timing. Even though the script was written with Culkin in mind, Columbus had never worked with the actor before and suggested holding proper auditions to look at other children. Hughes agreed, and Columbus ended up watching more than 200 young actors. In the end, he reached the same conclusion. Culkin was simply the perfect choice. The script itself continued to change right up until filming began. Hughes was deeply worried that the movie could be ridiculed. The central idea of parents accidentally leaving a child behind felt risky, and Hughes was determined to close every possible logical gap. Columbus later said Hughes spent days and nights rewriting scenes, carefully fixing anything audiences might question. Casting Joe Pesci created no real problems. Pesci wanted to do a pure comedy and agreed to join the film almost immediately without even reading the full script. The situation with the role of Marv was much more complicated. The producers wanted Daniel Stern, but his asking price was too high for the modest budget the studio had approved. Stern was temporarily replaced by Daniel Roebuck, who was willing to work for very little money. However, during rehearsals, it became obvious that Roebuck and Pesci had no on-screen chemistry at all. According to Hughes, it was instantly noticeable. Roebuck was let go, and Stern was brought back after the producers agreed to meet his demands. Roebuck later claimed that the studio never truly intended to keep him and only used him as leverage, saying the chemistry excuse was simply a convenient explanation. During filming, Pesci and Stern constantly joked around. Many of their exaggerated expressions and physical comedy moments made it into the final cut. Both actors later admitted they did not believe the movie would be successful and decided to just have fun without holding back. Despite being a relatively small-scale story, filming lasted almost 4 months. Test screenings went extremely well, but the movie was still heavily edited. Early cuts included many scenes with Kevin's family in Paris, but audiences disliked being pulled away from the main character and wanted more Kevin. As a result, nearly all of those scenes were removed. The film's music was written by John Williams, and his involvement happened almost by accident. Columbus later said the budget was so limited they never imagined working with a composer of that level. Williams liked attending rough-cut screenings and happened to see Home Alone. He loved what he saw and personally offered to score the film for a relatively small fee by his standards. At that point, the movie was ready for release, and no one yet realized they were about to witness one of the biggest success stories in comedy history. Home Alone was released in November of 1990, and from the very beginning, the studio treated it as a minor project. Fox gave the film only 1,200 screens across the United States, which was a surprisingly small number even for a family comedy at the time. The expectation was simple. Home Alone would compete for second place at best, while first place was assumed to be untouchable. Everyone believed Rocky V starring Sylvester Stallone would dominate the box office without any real competition. That plan collapsed immediately. During its opening weekend, Home Alone earned $17 million. That result was enough to take first place. Rocky V made $14 million, and another release, The Rescuers Down Under, opened with just $3.5 million. Despite this unexpected victory, Fox still did not rush to expand the film's release. The studio already had 2,000 screens reserved for Predator 2, which was considered a guaranteed hit. Because of that, Home Alone remained limited in its second weekend. And even without additional theaters, the film shocked everyone again. In its second weekend, Home Alone earned over $20 million, outperforming much larger releases. Predator 2 failed to meet expectations and debuted only in fourth place. Only after that did Fox begin to pull screens away from Predator 2 and give them to Home Alone, which continued to dominate the box office week after week. By the end of its theatrical run in the United States, the film had earned $285 million. Worldwide, its total reached $477 million. With those numbers, Home Alone instantly entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the highest-grossing comedy in Hollywood history. It was a title no one involved in the project had ever imagined was possible. What makes this success even more interesting is that not everyone working on the film believed in it while it was being made. Actor John Hurd, who played Kevin's father, openly complained during production. He was convinced they were making a silly and forgettable movie, and he repeatedly told director Chris Columbus exactly that. After the film became a massive hit, Hurd personally approached Columbus and apologized for everything he had said. Columbus later claimed he even recorded that apology on a video camera and still keeps the footage. The scale of Home Alone's success made a sequel unavoidable. Studio executives pushed for it immediately, and audiences across the country sent letters asking for more. John Hughes and Chris Columbus were initially hesitant. They understood how difficult it would be to repeat such a phenomenon. But the pressure was enormous, both from the studio and from the public, and eventually they agreed to continue the story. At first, Hughes planned to call the second film Home Alone Again. As the script developed, the title was abandoned because it sounded awkward and uninspired. To stay ahead of the studio's demands, Hughes began writing a script for a third film, while the second one was still in development. In that early version, Kevin was already a teenager. That third script was shown to the studio and approved almost immediately. This showed just how confident everyone was after the success of the first movie, even before the second film had entered production. While working on the sequel, some changes were requested by the cast. Catherine O'Hara, who played Kevin's mother, felt her character did not show enough concern for her missing child. She worried audiences would hate her, so she asked for additional scenes to make her desperation more visible. One of the most difficult parts of making the second film turned out to be filming at the airport. The production needed the airport to function normally during shooting. During the first film, this had not caused any problems, but after Home Alone became a massive hit, everything changed. Macaulay Culkin's popularity made filming almost impossible. Crowds constantly broke through security just to see him. Production had to stop repeatedly because people were trying to get close to the young actor. Another memorable moment involved the hotel used for filming. For one scene, the production removed a carpet from the hotel lobby so Kevin could slide across the floor. After filming ended, the carpet was never put back. The hotel owner, Donald Trump, reportedly enjoyed watching guests slip and fall, although he later claimed it was simply his favorite scene in the movie. Director Chris Columbus was most frustrated by the budget issues. The second film went over budget largely because of weather problems. There was no snow in Central Park during filming, so the production had to spend a significant amount of money creating artificial snow, only for real snow to fall shortly afterward. The sequel cost $28 million, $10 million more than the first film. This time there were no issues with marketing or screen availability. Home Alone 2 opened in first place with $31 million. In its second week, it faced competition from Aladdin and The Bodyguard, but still managed to hold the top position. By the end of the year, Home Alone 2 earned $358 million worldwide, finishing third overall. Aladdin took first place with $504 million, and The Bodyguard came in second with $410 million. The difference was largely due to perception. Many viewers felt the sequel was simply a repeat of the first film, and this especially hurt the movie in the United States. The original Home Alone earned $285 million domestically, while the sequel made only $173 million. Outside the United States, audience reception was much warmer, and in some countries the second film was almost as beloved as the first. Critics, however, were far less forgiving and largely destroyed the sequel in reviews. Even so, the box office numbers were still high enough that another sequel seemed inevitable. John Hughes insisted that Kevin needed to grow up for the story to feel fresh, so the plan to start production in 1995 remained in place. What no one could predict was how quickly Macaulay Culkin's career would begin to change. Despite the enormous success of the first two films, the future of the Home Alone franchise was far from secure. The main problem was Macaulay Culkin himself, or more precisely, how quickly his career began to change. After Home Alone 2, Culkin was no longer the charming child audiences had fallen in love with. He was growing up fast, and his next roles failed to capture the same magic. The film The Good Son did not flop, but it clearly showed a very different image of the actor. The projects that followed performed worse and worse. When Richie Rich failed at the box office, Culkin made a difficult decision. He chose to step away from acting entirely for a while, believing that continuing to appear in unsuccessful films could permanently damage his career. Producers tried to convince him to return for another Home Alone sequel, but Culkin refused. No matter how much pressure was applied, he was not interested in reprising the role of Kevin. At that point, the studio faced a clear choice: either cancel the third film altogether or completely rethink the concept. Many people involved believed the franchise should end, but the studio was not willing to let go of such a recognizable name. The original idea was to create a spin-off focused on Kevin's brother, a character played by Kieran Culkin in the first films. This approach would have allowed the use of part of the original family cast. Most importantly, John Hughes hoped to bring back Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern. That plan collapsed quickly. Both Pesci and Stern showed no interest in returning. Without them, the idea lost its meaning, and the studio abandoned the concept entirely. Another option briefly considered was turning Home Alone into a television series. The idea involved a child dealing with troublemakers over the course of many episodes. Development began in that direction, but once part of the script was written, the studio decided the story could still work as a feature film. And so, Home Alone 3 was sent back to theaters. Casting for the third film was extensive. Nearly 200 young actors auditioned for the lead role. Elijah Wood was among those considered, but he was rejected for being too old. At the same time, the film introduced Scarlett Johansson in an early role. It was a reminder that even failed projects sometimes contain future stars. Naturally, the studio wanted Chris Columbus to return as director. John Hughes personally tried to convince him, but Columbus consistently refused. Sometimes he claimed he was too busy. Other times he admitted he felt too emotionally attached to the original cast to continue. Instead, Columbus recommended Raja Gosnell. Gosnell had worked as an editor on the first Home Alone, and had collaborated with Columbus on Mrs. Doubtfire and 9 Months. Hughes approved the choice and Gosnell was hired. For him, the third Home Alone did not become a career disaster. Immediately afterward, he directed several commercially successful films. The third film received a budget of $32 million, making it the most expensive entry in the franchise at the time. It was released in December of 1997 and opened in fourth place, earning only $5 million during its opening weekend. Over time, opinions about Home Alone 3 softened. Some viewers argued it was not as bad as its reputation suggested. Critic Roger Ebert even called it the only normal film in the entire franchise. But in 1997, audiences strongly rejected it. After just 2 weeks in theaters, the film dropped out of the top 10 completely and disappeared from the box office. While the movie technically failed, it did so quietly. With home video sales, the studio may have eventually recovered its investment. The $32 million film earned $79 million worldwide. It was disappointing, but not catastrophic. Still, the message was clear. The franchise had lost its theatrical power. After the quiet failure of Home Alone 3, the studio still refused to let the franchise die. But it was clear that theatrical releases were no longer a safe option. The brand had lost its power at the box office. As a result, the fourth film was officially repositioned as a television project. Home Alone 4 was developed as a potential pilot for a full TV series. The idea was simple. If the movie succeeded on television, the story would continue in episodic form. The film was produced specifically for broadcast and premiered on television rather than in theaters. The goal was not box office numbers, but strong ratings. However, the plan failed almost immediately. The television premiere delivered very weak ratings, far below what the studio expected from such a recognizable name. The idea of turning Home Alone into a TV series was abandoned, even though contracts were already being prepared for further episodes. One detail from this period stood out. Daniel Stern was once again offered a chance to return to the franchise, this time in the television version. Stern later said that this proposal felt like the biggest insult of his entire career. At that point, the franchise entered a strange limbo. Years later, a fifth Home Alone film was produced and released directly to television in 2012. It passed almost unnoticed by general audiences, and its reception made the situation painfully clear. Viewer scores settled around 3 out of 10. This suggested a level of quality that many felt was difficult to sit through even casually. The movie did nothing to revive interest in the brand, and instead reinforced its declining reputation. By this stage, Home Alone had become an example of a franchise that continued, not because it had something new to say, but simply because it could still be used as a recognizable title. What was once a cultural phenomenon fully transitioned into a background product. It was designed to fill programming slots rather than create lasting impressions. The theatrical magic was long gone, and even nostalgia was no longer enough to save it. After years of silence, it seemed that the Home Alone franchise had finally reached its natural end. The brand was exhausted. Its reputation was damaged. Audience interest was almost completely gone. But in modern Hollywood, no recognizable name is ever truly dead. Years later, the franchise returned once again, this time under the Disney banner. A sixth film was announced, and from the very beginning, no one could clearly explain what it was supposed to be. At different stages, the project was described as a remake, then as a soft reboot, then as a tribute to the original. Eventually, it became something that simply existed without a clear identity. The movie was produced specifically for Disney+. It was assembled quickly and released into a streaming ecosystem where massive view counts are often treated as success, regardless of actual reception. Disney proudly reported impressive viewing statistics. They emphasized that millions of users had at least briefly clicked on the movie's poster. This number was presented as another record for the platform. Whether that translated into real engagement was never entirely clear. Audience reception, however, was very clear. Viewer scores aligned perfectly with the trajectory the franchise had followed for years. The sixth film joined the fourth and fifth entries at around 3 out of 10, reinforcing the idea that the series had long lost its creative foundation. By this point, Home Alone had become a strange cinematic paradox, a franchise that repeatedly proved it could fall lower yet continued to return. Each new installment seemed to test the limits of how far nostalgia could be stretched before it completely lost its power. And yet the story does not truly feel finished. Thank you for watching, and stay connected.